thank you again, Lynsey, for doing this. You know, many of our members knew Winston Link, and he was a personal friend of mine. I've got, in fact, I was hoping that if I was at home, I could show some of the stuff. I've got signed prints from him. I have an autographed light bulb, the flash bulb that he shot. He and I traveled together a few times. I used to, when I was traveling in the South, I'd visit him in Virginia. And he was a fun guy. And the thing I remember most about him was that laugh. When you get him laughing, he had a guffaw that would clear a restaurant. You know, everybody would turn their head and look at it, you know. But he loved to laugh, and it was a lot of fun. His house was beautiful. And but Winston, you know, was quite a character. And again, he was very present in this area. His railway equipment was at Whippany, and a lot of us were part of that and could see him working when he was able. So so we're all connected to Winston somehow. So we're very interested and looking forward to what you have to say. So Lynsey Allie, thank you very much.
Well, thank you guys. So yeah, let me share my screen here. Let's see. All right. Come on, there we go. So yes, so I hope you guys can hear me okay. Good. Thanks again for having me. I feel like a pro at virtual events now. I have had a conversation with the cat to not interrupt, and I've tried in vain to fix my squeaky chair. So we are rolling right along. But yes, so like has been mentioned, today we're going to talk about Winston Link and his life and his work. And I am sweating extra from all the folks here that actually knew Link. So I hope you guys please don't heckle me too harshly today. So yeah, let's get started, and we're gonna talk about Link. And so one of the most popular questions I'm always asked about Link is, what does the O stand for in Winston Link? And his name is Ogle Winston Link. And I like to joke that that is probably why he went by Winston. No offense to anybody out there who might be an Ogle. But he was born, Ogle Winston Link was born on December 16th, 1914. He was the second child and the first son born to Albert and Ann Link. And his given name is to honor a couple of ancestors, Alexander Ogle and John Winston Jones. And Albert Link wanted his son to have the initials OWL. And so that's how they were able to just pull all these different things in and make that work. Albert and Ann, they actually lived in Virginia and moved to New York very early on in their marriage. So all of the three of the Link children were born in New York, and they lived in Brooklyn. And Albert Link, he taught manual arts in the public schools, so like shop type things. He was an inventor. He actually even served 2 years in the New York State Assembly. So he was a really active guy, had a lot of varied interests. Albert, you know, with him having all these different things he was involved in, he made sure that all 3 of his children, you know, Eleanor, Winston, and Albert Jr., all sort of got different experiences, and that they were well provided for, and that he instilled a lot of these same qualities into his children. And you can see here in this photo, that's Winston, and they've made some birdhouses. So they were always doing a lot of different creative sort of things. And Winston, he was a good student. He got excellent grades, especially in math. In high school, he actually won a prize for building a camera that could take a photo of the eclipse of the sun. And you can see that there in the photo. It's actually made from a pair of binoculars and part of an old broken camera. So, I mean, he's pretty smart to have figured that out. He also worked at a local drugstore developing photos, and that was sort of his real first interaction with photography. All three of the Link children attended really good private colleges. After high school, Winston would go to business school for a year before enrolling at the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn for civil engineering. And he was so popular that he was elected class president all 4 years that he was there. And he also worked for the school newspaper while he was there. And he graduated in 1937 with a degree in civil engineering. And this was sort of right in the midst of the Great Depression. So not many jobs open for civil engineers, unfortunately. So he was at a dinner right about the time of graduation, and he was telling, you know, a funny story about an assignment that he was on at one point for the college paper, and a representative for a PR firm sort of overheard this story and hired him at that point. And so that is how he got his first job out of college. And it was as a photographer. Again, he was a civil engineer by training. He'd never studied photography, so everything that he knew or did was all self-taught. The PR firm that hired him was Carl Bayer and Associates, and they were a PR firm that created stories and photos that were sent to like newspapers and magazines. And they were supposed to be printed to look like news, but were really just advertisements. So like very early spam, I guess. But yeah, so it was while he was working for Carl Bayer and Associates that he really learned how to stage photos and to really capture an image that he, you know, had in mind that he needed to get. And he also learned how to work really well with people at this job, because obviously there were people and models and stuff that were involved in these photos. One of his earlier and probably most well-known commercial photo is the one that's seen here on this slide. I call it Fire and Ice. That's not what it's called. That's just what I call it. And so it's such a sort of odd photo to me, but so the whole idea, it's an advertisement for glass. And so you can see that there's 2 blocks of ice down at the bottom, and you can't see it very well, but there's a plate of glass and a fire underneath it. And then the, you know, stack of ice, and the girl there is just more than happy to stand on the ice, you know, with the fire, because the glass is so strong. And she's got her mirror that she's looking into. And then every time I give a tour, there's always at least one person that tells me she's taking a selfie. This was 1938. No, that's not what what she's doing, but okay, that's fine. So also, while he was out traveling for all these different assignments, he was in Louisiana for the state tourism agency in early 1940s, and that is where he met Marteel Oglesby. And she was actually a model for one of his photos, and they ended up getting married in early 1942. So 1942, World War II was obviously underway. Link was not eligible for active military service. He actually had lost part of his hearing due to a bad case of the mumps when he was a child. So he could not serve active military duty. He did, however, quit his job with Carl Bayer in early 1942 in order to work at the Airborne Instruments Lab, which was located in New York. It was part of Columbia University on Long Island. And it was a secret lab that researched and designed and built these magnetic airborne detectors. And they were these devices that could fly like just feet above the water. And they were used to detect enemy submarines. And they would take like these underwater photos of submarines. And so this work was able to use both his, engineering skills as well as his photography skills. I have not seen any of these photos, but apparently they were both very hard to capture and very hard to develop. So that allowed him to use, all of his training and his skills. And it was also during this time in the early 40s, while he was working in New York, that he first had the idea to photograph trains and photograph trains at night. And that sort of started to develop. And the Airborne Instruments Lab just happened to be along the route of the Long Island Railroad. And so, during some of his downtime while he was working, Link began to sort of take test photos of the trains that were going by, which was kind of risky on his part because, during wartime, one of the things you don't do is photograph transportation of anything. So, I mean, he was kind of taking a gamble a little bit there to, just basically mess around with this idea of taking photos of trains, but he did. And this here is one of those photos. So yeah. So the Airborne Instruments Lab closed immediately upon the end of World War II. And so Link was again looking for another job. And he decided that he was going to be a freelance photographer. And, he didn't really want a big company or this huge operation. Like he was really hands-on. He liked to be involved in start to finish. He liked to set up the photos, take them, develop them, the whole thing. So, it never was really about being a really big sort of company that he had. But he still, he had to be able to sell his talent to potential clients and things. And so it took a while to sort of build that base up. And he had a studio here. This photo here, it's not an Winston Link photo. It's just a photo that I had found. And his first studio was actually right in this area of Brooklyn. So that's just to sort of give you an idea of where he was working. It was also during this time in 1945 that Marteel and Winston would have a son. His name is Conway, and Conway is actually still alive today. He is in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he actually teaches at LSU Shreveport campus. So, and I just talked to him the other day, actually. So, we stay in touch, and so I talk to him on occasion. Unfortunately, the strain of sort of starting this brand new business and new clients, it took a toll. And so the Links would end up getting divorced not long after Conway was born. And so, like I said, Link, he was a very scientific, mathematical guy. He, had that engineering background. So now that he was sort of moving into being more of a photographer, he wanted to have like a signature style. And part of that, he really wanted to emphasize like a three-dimensional sort of space. And he liked to use lighting to help do that. And he was especially good at photographing industrial things like big machinery, construction, factories, things like that. He also liked to include people in his photos whenever he could. He liked the contrast of, the human component with the industrial. And so, I mean, this ended up working out for him. Very soon, he sort of became that go-to guy if you had an assignment for taking photographs that required any sort of special lighting or was really technically demanding. And so he, again, was sort of traveling around for different clients, different jobs. And, that idea that he had, during World War II about taking these photographs of trains at night, that had never left. He still, had that desire to make that happen. He was determined to control the lighting and to eliminate like distracting, background things that show up in photos. His, Norfolk and Western project was still years down the road. That had not even occurred to him yet, but he still attempted some of these nighttime photos while he was out traveling around. So this photo here, that's one of the first ones that he took. This is in Louisiana, and he did a lot of work there early on, which does lead up to Norfolk and Western. And so I feel like a lot of you are probably, sort of aware, obviously, of Norfolk and Western Railway. But for anyone that might not be, Norfolk and Western is headquartered in Roanoke, Virginia, which is where I'm at, with the museum, obviously. And the railroad is what made Roanoke, Roanoke. Before Norfolk and Western showed up, we were a small town called Big Lick, which is an awful name. So I'm glad that Norfolk and Western showed up. And that just turned us into a boom town, practically overnight. And Norfolk and Western was famous for building their own locomotives, and the quality of those locomotives was unmatched. So they were also one of the last holdouts that were using exclusively steam. A lot of other companies had already converted to diesel. So yeah, Norfolk and Western was sort of one of the last to let that go. Many years later, Norfolk and Western would become Norfolk Southern, which is what they are today. Unfortunately, most of their operations has relocated out of Roanoke. We don't have much left of Norfolk Southern. A lot of it has relocated to Georgia and Pennsylvania. And so early on in 1955, Winston was working at the Westinghouse plant in Stanton, Virginia, and he was photographing the manufacturing of air conditioner units there in Stanton. And that's where he first saw one of the N&W locomotives go by while he was there. And he learned that the Shenandoah route also went through Waynesboro, which is just a few miles from Stanton. They're pretty close together. And so after he was done at Westinghouse, he went to Waynesboro and he took several test shots and he sent them to Norfolk and Western to ask for permission to be allowed onto their property to photograph the trains. And so this photo here, that is the very first photo that would become the N&W project. And as they say, the rest is history. So Link, early on, he went to Robert Hall Smith, who was the then president of Norfolk and Western, about being able to photograph trains on N&W property. I don't know if any of you are aware, Norfolk Southern now, they do not take kindly to any sort of, trespassing. Don't walk near the tracks, don't walk with, just don't do it. They take it very seriously. So he had to ask permission, obviously, to be allowed on the property. And Smith was very happy to oblige, you know, and he gave Link a lot of authority and a lot of power. Actually, I mean, Link was allowed on the property. He was allowed to photograph. He could stop and start trains. He could even call dispatchers to reroute trains, which just sort of blows my mind a little bit that he was allowed to do that, because he was not paid by N&W for his work. He was not employed by Norfolk and Western to do this. So if he wanted to do it, he was going to have to pay for it himself. And he did. It was entirely financed by Link. And, he finished the Norfolk and Western project in 1960, and he estimated the cost then in 1960 to have been about $20,000, which equates to almost $175,000 in 2019. So, I mean, it was a real costly undertaking for him to do. He wasn't getting paid. So why do it? Initially, Link was just really excited to take photos that he wanted to take and capture images that he envisioned, and not have to answer to any client or worry about any job that he was doing. He could just do what he wanted and just be creative however he wanted to do that. And second, and I don't know if this was his intention when he started, but I think probably pretty early on it became sort of part of this project, is that, while he was out along the Norfolk and Western route, he was in sort of really rural areas a lot of times, and he would travel to these towns and see these houses that had sprung up along the rail because so many people, I mean, they relied on trains as their livelihood. That was, their job, how they got places, how they got a lot. And so, once he sort of saw that, and he also realized that once the steam phased out, a lot of these same people would lose their jobs. Diesel is not, it doesn't require as much manpower to run as steam. So he knew that he was also documenting a vanishing way of life for a lot of folks. And, while he was out taking these photos, traveling around, I mean, he became friends with a lot of these people, and, he would be invited to their house for dinner to stay with them while he was there. People were really intrigued by what he was doing and why. And I mean, he was just this, fast talking New Yorker that had come into town. And so everybody, sort of made friends with him. And, the Norfolk and Western project would become one of the most monumental photography projects undertaken by a single individual. And so some of his earlier photos, we're just gonna look at a few. And I love this photo right here. This is one of a series of photos. There's about 5 of these, I believe. And they crack me up. This whole series of photos here, I love them because there's just so much going on. I mean, you can see the train that's like 4 feet out the window, just rolling by. There's the kid waving, and there's cats in the chair, cats on the rug. There's a dog. You know, the mom just looks so displeased about everything that's going on. And she's like that the whole series. There's not one photo where she's smiling or looking even remotely okay with anything that's going on. You know, and I love the bold leaf wallpaper choice there. It's all so good. And you know, especially now in this time, you know, I look at this photo and I'm like, you know, maybe she's just been homeschooling the kid all day and hasn't gotten out of the house, and maybe she's just ready for a cocktail, and maybe that's what we need to take away from this photo. But another thing that I really like about this series is that the little boy in this photo, his name is George, and he was about 4 or 5 when this photo was taken, and he is actually called the museum, and I was able to talk to him, and he vaguely, you know, remembers Link coming in and setting up, you know, his lights and his camera and stuff to take these photos. And he actually had a few of these, like the originals. And, you know, unfortunately he lost them in a house fire. And that's why he was calling the museum, because he was trying to get duplicates of the photos. So that's how I got to talk to him, which is unfortunate, you know, that he lost the originals, but, you know, it was very interesting to get to talk to him. You know, one of the things that I think is really unique about Link's photos is that while they were taken in a very different time and a whole different sort of era, they weren't taken so long ago that there are not still people, you know, that remember him and were in his photos. I mean, there's plenty of people that, you know, were in photos of his that are still alive, and, you know, they come to the museum on occasion. And, you know, I just really like the stories a lot of times that go behind some of the photos. This is another Link photo, and one of his earlier ones. And when I started working at the Link Museum about 5.5 years ago, I did not know anything about Link. Like, I could tell you nothing. And this photo is one of the like first ones that I'd seen of his. And I, you know, again, I didn't realize, you know, what he did with lights and all this stuff. And so I saw this photo and I was like, oh, so this guy takes like fake photos because, you know, the way he had lit the scene, it reminded me of sort of like a very Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, you know, backlot movie stage sort of setup. And I mean, it's in, I think this is Lithia, Virginia. Yeah, Lithia, which is like 45 minutes out of Roanoke. I mean, it's not that far. So, you know, I mean, I think it's just really, really cool to see that he, you know, could light a photo in such a way that it makes an untrained eye initially think that it's, you know, like a fake photo almost. So, yeah. Again, Link, you know, he was determined to create these dramatic black and white images of trains at night, which, I mean, even today is sort of, you know, kind of a weird concept. So back in the 50s, I mean, it was an unheard of concept, and it required a lot of special equipment and, you know, flash bulbs and just skill. And so he had a camera custom made specifically for this project. He wanted to know every button, every function, every piece of that camera. He had special flashbulb reflectors made so that they could hold an abnormally large amount of flash bulbs, and they had to have like battery operated power because again, he's going into, I mean, some of these areas even today are kind of remote. So I can only imagine, you know, in the 50s and early 60s, they were extra remote. So he had to have special batteries made to like power all of this equipment. And so with all of this specialized equipment, he was now able to fire off 60 flash bulbs at once, which is the equivalent of about 100,000 100-watt bulbs. So that's pretty bright. And his camera shutter speed was like 1/250th of a second, you know, because he wanted to capture these trains that sometimes are flying by at 60 miles an hour. I mean, he had to have something that could keep up. And you know, again, since he was working in these remote areas and having to set up all of these pieces, sometimes he would have to run up to a mile of wire to connect all the bulbs to all the cameras, you know, to be able to capture. And that is just sort of the technical part of it. The physical demands of trying to get some of these images was equally as daunting, in my opinion, if not more. Many of his sites were just out in the middle of nowhere. And so he would sometimes scout the locations for days before, and he would make copious notes and calculations trying to figure out exactly where, you know, these flash bulbs are going to go and this camera is going to sit, in order to capture exactly what he had in his mind that he wanted to get. And I mean, he built platforms on top of train station, like the roof of a train station, in order to capture, you know, what he wanted. He would shimmy across these like wires over rivers. It was a lot, and a lot for someone that wasn't even doing this as his paid job. I mean, he just was doing it because he wanted to do it. And, you know, if a calculation was wrong, or, you know, if one of the flash bulbs like didn't go off, the whole image was lost and he had to start over basically. So, I mean, it was a lot, you know, to sort of take on. And so there's some images here that sort of show that. I feel like a lot of people have seen the self-portrait here with one of his assistants, and you can see, you know, they've got multiple flashbulb reflectors, they've got cameras in front of them, they've got a stack of boxes of flashbulbs in the back, and, you know, piled up at their feet are just all this wire that they had to use to make this work. Luray, Virginia, that's another one that took a lot of setup for them to capture. And so you can sort of see, you know, they're running the wire, there's a light set up. I mean, it was a big, big undertaking. Here you can see, I was talking about shimmying across the river. You can see in that photo there, that's like wires that they just like threw across the river and like tied to a tree somewhere to make this like bridge, just so he could like go back and forth to set up for one photo. And I believe this photo was taken in like February in Virginia. So I mean, if he fell in that water, it was gonna be really cold. So I mean, he was very, very dedicated, you know, to what he was doing. There's the other photo here, you can see that's his car, you know, with the trunk popped up, and there's just boxes and boxes of stuff. And, you know, so much equipment was needed to make these photos. I also talked about the platform that he built. You can see he's standing on the roof of the Cloverdale station. And yeah, he built something on there to capture this certain angle that he wanted. Again, he's back in Luray in the other photo. Thankfully, this one was taken in August, so at least the water was warmer by then. And you know, he's just running all this electrical equipment right by the water, which is, again, I feel like he's sort of taking a risk there, but you know, he got some great photos from all of this work, so it paid off. So Link took about 2,400 photos as part of the N&W project. Only about 300 to 400 of those are in the daytime, and even less of those are in color. The Abingdon branch in Virginia was almost exclusively where Link would shoot the daytime photos and the color photos. The grades on the Abingdon branch were too steep and too dangerous to run the trains at night. So they only ran trains during the day through Abingdon. Surprisingly, the Abingdon branch was Link's favorite route on the N&W line, which, you know, I find kind of funny because, you know, he was the guy obsessed with taking photos of trains at night, and his favorite part of the rail was where they couldn't even run the trains at night. So, you know, and the National Railway Historical Society actually did a big feature on Link's color work about 2 years ago now in their bulletin magazine that they produced, and it was a really popular, well-received piece. Everyone was really interested because, again, Link, you know, he's known for his black and white and for his nighttime photography. So, you know, to have a whole publication almost dedicated to his color photos from the day were, you know, it was very different. And so here, this is Green Cove. I feel like a lot of folks know and really like Green Cove, and that was one that he did simultaneously black and white and color at the same time. In this photo here, I call this Popes on the Porch. Again, that's not the actual title of this photo, but I think this might be my very favorite Link photo. I love this photo just for everything that, again, it has going on. You know, the Victorian Queen Anne details of the porch and the train that's illuminated as it's going by with the white smoke coming out, and the couple that are just standing there watching the train. I think it's a really sweet, you know, poignant image, and you know, I love this photo. By the late 1950s, Norfolk and Western had started to phase out some of their steam, and Mr. and Mrs. Pope that lived along one of the routes, they knew that this photo which was taken on New Year's Eve in 1957, that was the last steam train that would go by, and they knew that that was the last one. So they went out specifically to watch it go and know that it was the last one. So I love that photo. I just think it's, again, a really powerful image. And so in March of 1960, Winston Link took his very last photo of N&W, and this image here is his very last one. And in May of 1960, the fire of the last N&W steam engines, they were extinguished for the last time, and that was it. And so after you spend 5 years documenting Norfolk and Western steam, you know, how do you really follow that up? And so, you know, after the steam operation had ended at Norfolk and Western, Winston, he went back to New York, back home. He again was looking for some big industrial topic to photograph. So in the early 1960s, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge between Brooklyn and Staten Island was being built. And so Link went and documented its construction. And as a result, he was hired by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority to photograph all the bridges in New York Harbor. So that kept him busy for a little bit. It was around this same time that he also moved his studio from East 34th Street to a smaller space on Park Avenue South. And, you know, TV advertising was starting to really come up, and it was quickly replacing print advertising. And the style of popular photography, it was going more casual and more candid, which was not what Link was about. So, you know, he was sort of scaling back a little bit. And, you know, this photo here, this signature of his, you know, his initials were OWL. So there was, you know, he used to sign some of his work with the O and the W, you know, to make this owl. And I have folks, you know, involved in the museum that can tell me which studio he was working out of based off of the signature that he would use, the owl that he would do. Not that good. I can't do that. So, but I just think it's interesting that, you know, he did that signature and that was sort of his thing. And, you know, that people can tell me that. So he also found another project to occupy his time. While he was in Canada on assignment, he purchased a train, as one does, I guess. It was a D4 locomotive from 1911. And to go with that, he also got a Rutland passenger car, and he restored that himself, all by himself, by hand. It took him like 20 years to restore that one rail car, but he did it. He was also gifted a caboose by Norfolk and Western, and that caboose is on display at the museum currently, so you can see it and you know, see the caboose. Again, when I first started working there and knew nothing about Link, I had a phone call, and it was somebody, and they were wanting me to tell them about Link's train that he owned, and I had no idea. And so I'm like on the phone and like, you know, furiously Googling like Canadian Pacific train Link. And one of the first images that came up was this one. And I was trying to figure it out, like what was I looking at here? Is this the one? And I don't know if you can see right there above the chain link fence, you can see OW Link on the side. So this is his actual train that he had. I just, you know, you got to love Google. I just sort of stumbled upon this really quick. But yeah, so this was his actual train that he owned. And I'm told that a private party now owns this train, and it's being restored in Goshen, Virginia. So that's where it is now. I don't know where the passenger car is right now. So in the 1980s, Link's photos were starting to become really popular and gain some attention. Unfortunately, the popularity that he would see for his photos would be overshadowed by some personal drama. In 1984, Winston married his like publicist marketing assistant, and her name was Conchita Mendoza. And not long after they were married, he also hired Edward Hayes to work on restoring the Canadian Pacific engine that he bought. And by 1990, Conchita and Edward Hayes were allegedly having this affair, while also like funneling somewhere of, $250,000 out of Link's bank account. And, she was also stealing and hiding some of his photos, his negatives, his camera equipment. And just, she was a real piece of work. And she was telling galleries and art dealers that Link had Alzheimer's and, was just sort of losing it. And they would just send checks directly to her because they believed, that she was just handling all of his stuff, as his wife, because he was sort of deteriorating, which was not the case. And around 1991, Link sort of realized what was going on. And so he took steps to salvage the last of like his equipment and his photos and things. So she couldn't get them. And when she realized that he had realized what she had been doing, she apparently flew into, just full on rage. She locked him in their basement and put these big chains across the stairs and the door so that he couldn't get out. Just very crazy. A neighbor, I believe it was a neighbor, came and like let Winston out of the basement. I think he'd realized he hadn't seen him in a little while and sort of, grew concerned. And, that's how they found out he was just being sort of held hostage in his own home. And then obviously you don't really bounce back from that. So they were getting divorced, and she claimed all these, accounts of physical abuse by him. So that way, she would get to keep the house while their divorce was, finalized and everything. And so they did eventually, divorce. Later, she would be arrested for trying to sell some of the photos that she stole. This was mid-90s. She was arrested for trying to sell his photos on eBay, and she served 4 years in jail. She was paroled in 2004, or in 2000. In 2004, she was arrested again for trying to sell more of his stolen photos on eBay again, and went back to jail for that. The last I heard, she was living in New Jersey or New York with her daughter, I believe. But I don't know, her actual whereabouts. Another question that I get a lot is, were the stolen, items ever recovered? And some items were found in a storage unit in Pennsylvania, but there's some stuff that we don't know where it is or what happened to it. There was a movie, like a Lifetime-esque sort of movie, the photographer, his wife, her lover. So I have not seen it. I've tried to track this down to watch it just to see how it is, but I have not. So there is a film that has been made about this whole situation. But yeah, so unfortunately, you know, Link's later life was sort of unhappy. But in the 1980s, early 90s, Link, again, you know, his photos were becoming really popular. And it was during this time that he put together several books about the N&W project, Steam, Steel, and Stars, The Last Steam Railroad in America, Night Trick. Later, the Winston Link Museum, in collaboration with some other authors, would put together Life Along the Line as well as a book called Man in the Museum. And all of these books, except for Man in the Museum, are out of print now. And I can sometimes get like secondhand used copies on occasion. Even now, you know, these books were from the 80s and, you know, they're so old, they're out of print. I can't keep them in stock when I can get them. I mean, people continually buy them even today. I just can't even keep up with the demand, to be honest. While Link was out taking photos, he a lot of times would also have audio and video recording that would be going on. And the audio recordings that he did were popular well before his photos. I mean, no one really cared about his photos until like the 80s. But his sound recordings were popular from the start, even in like the 60s. And obviously they were done on vinyl. Initially, we have them on CD now, but you know, I think it's really funny that this, you know, there's the cover for one of the vinyl albums there, but there's also here a photo of an advertisement that I'm assuming Link came up with to sell these recordings. And I mean, again, it's just noises like of trains. There's no instrumental music in the background or anything like that. It is just noises of trains. And so I thought it was really clever of him to come up with this advertisement that's like, you know, buy this album if you have a terrible landlord or a bad mother-in-law or hateful neighbors. And, you know, if you want to break a lease, like buy this album. And I mean, I just thought that was really clever for him to sort of market it that way. So, yeah. And we have that on display at the museum as well. Vanity Fair magazine did a piece called Shooting Past 80, and it featured Link as one of the most famed photographers still taking photos in the early 2000s. And this was a real honor for Link. I mean, he was alongside a lot of really famous people as well. I mean, it was a really nice piece that they did. And we brought out 1218 specifically for the photo for Vanity Fair. And you can see Link, he's sort of sitting on the front there. His outfit, he almost blends right in with with the train, but 1218 was his favorite. He loved it, so they brought it out just for him to take this photo. And yeah, I mean, it was a real honor for him. And so about the same time as the Vanity Fair article came out, you know, there was talk of a permanent Winston Link Museum. You know, he had temporary exhibits here and there, but nothing permanent. And so, you know, some folks explored locations, and the former Norfolk and Western passenger station would be the final stop. And this is located in Roanoke, Virginia, right down like maybe half a mile, if that, from the Norfolk and Western shops. And the building itself was constructed in 1905, and it would later be renovated in 1949 by famed industrial designer Raymond Loewy, who is very fascinating in his own right. If you don't know Lowy, you should look him up. He's very fascinating. Passenger service stopped out of Roanoke in the late 1970s. And so the building sat vacant for a while. After that, they turned it into like cubicled office space for a little while, and then it sat vacant again. So around 2001, there was a group of Link supporters that got together with the Western Virginia Foundation for the Arts and Sciences. And so together, they got together and secured this building and were able to create a space that would permanently house Link's photos and a collection in Roanoke, because he loved Roanoke. I mean, that's where he had to go all the time for to talk to Norfolk and Western. And so he traveled in to Roanoke a lot. So by January of 2004, the Winston Link Museum officially opened to the public. And so this is what the building looks like today. This is the 1949 redo. We've kept as much of the 1949 as possible. So this is still what it looks like today. Unfortunately, Winston, he would not live to see his museum open. He suffered a heart attack and passed away in January of 2001. He was 86 years old. He was in New York at the time, and he was actually in front of a train station in New York when the paramedics got to him and pronounced that he had passed away. And he's buried in a Link family cemetery in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And so this photo here, this is actually Link inside the Norfolk and Western passenger station, and he's, checking the schedule. He went in and out of that station a lot, even as a passenger. And this schedule, the train schedule that's on the wall there, it's still there today. We have not touched it. It still is there from June 19th, 1955. It's still there. And we love our train schedule. So Link, he captured a disappearing era, and he took photos, took amazing photos when it was considerably more difficult than just applying filters to digital pictures with an app. His photos, they stand as a testament to this bygone era of steam railways, and not only for America, but especially for Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina. So thank you to Mr. Link for realizing the historic impact of the work that he was doing long before many others did. It's a real legacy that we're still able to share with so many people today because of what he did. And he was once quoted as saying, "All I wanted was to get some nice pictures of trains at night," which is precisely what he did. And that is Link.
That was excellent, Lynsey. Thank you. Just to sort of append a little postscript, and I think Richie has some more photos of it, but the combine car that was the Rutland car ended up here in New Jersey, actually very close to where our organization is based, in Whippany, New Jersey. And probably 6 or 8 months after Link passed at the end of 2001, it was either sold or donated to the I believe it's called the Railway Historical Society of Northern New York.
Oh, okay.
They moved it out of, it was in a place called Whippany, New Jersey, and they moved it out of Whippany. By the end of '01, it was gone, and it went up to somewhere in upstate New York.
Okay.
So
Well, good
that's,
to know. Yeah, because that's the one piece I was not sure exactly where it was.
yes, it was right here. It was actually very, it became a big part of sort of the New Jersey rail fan scene for a long time because it was on a little railroad called the Railway Valley, which was sort of a fan favorite for a long time. That'll be some of the photos that Richie has here to share with us.
Cool.
Then it ended up in Whippany on the Morristown and Erie, and now it's up in New York.
Awesome.
There's a whole bunch of questions, comments. There's a whole sort of a pile of things we'll have to unpack here. But Rich, if you have those
Sure.
photos, why don't you share that?
Yeah, so when you mentioned the Rutland Combine, I kind of quick went into my archive and dug up some photographs of it at the Railway Valley. So anyone who knows me knows I'm a big historian of the Railway Valley here in New Jersey. I've written a couple of books about it. So always one of the fun things about it was that Winston Link, this really great famous photographer, had his railroad car on the little 15-mile Railway Valley here in New Jersey. And just to give you a little background on it, it was a little family-owned and operated operation. It was operated by the Clark family for 3 generations. And Link actually became really close with the Clarks and the Davis family that also worked for the railroad. Link actually photographed George Davis's, the superintendent of the railroad's retirement party in 1972. He became really close with the family. The family actually gave me one of the recordings that Link had given to them.
Ricky actually has some of the leftovers from the barbecue.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I'll just quick show you and our guests some of what I have in regards to Link's relationship with the railroad. So this is a letter that Link had sent to George Clark, who was a very gruff personality and was the president of the Railway Valley. And I'll just draw everyone's attention to the second paragraph where Clark is very apprehensive about rail fans and rail enthusiasts, and Mr. Link writes back to Mr. Clark saying, "Here is some literature that will interest you. I forgot to leave it with you, and I think you should have it as proof that I am not a phony. But I can't deny that I am a little nuts." Signed, Winston Link. And this is what he sent to them. Along with the letter. It's a little pamphlet, first prize professional class 1957 Graflex International Photo Contest, and this is a picture at Luray.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'll show you some pictures of the Combine. So it showed up at the railroad in 1961. And this is how it showed up, the condition it came in. It came straight from the Rutland Railroad in New England. So Link went right to work, working on it all by himself.
Yep.
One bone of contention was that there's an extension cord coming out of the engine house, and Mr. Clark, president of the railroad, complained about who was paying the electric bill. So sometimes the railroad would hook it up to their regular train and turn it around for him to get at different sides of the car.
That's awesome.
But he worked on it from 61 to 74, and this is what it looked like when it was completed.
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, like I said, he was really dedicated. He did, I mean, like you said, all himself, just
Yeah.
It's a lot to do.
Yeah, and his I think it was a Model A he drove. There's some pictures of that around the depot there, and it really struck me that you say how he related to all the people and got to know them as he was doing his NW project, and that same thing rang true, getting to know all the personalities at this railroad when he brought his Rutland Combine. So.
And I didn't put it in the presentation, but later in his life, he actually was in the movie October Skies.
Oh yeah.
And he was driving the train in the movie. And so he's got a bit of a cameo in that as well, driving the train. And Jake Gyllenhaal is in there, and like he almost gets run over something by the train, and it's lame.
No, I'm live.
Yeah, they were. I think they were. The kids were stealing some rail, and they were all concerned that the train was going to derail because they thought that track was out of service.
Yeah. So.
So that's it for me.
He was an interesting guy. He did a lot.
Yeah.
He did a lot. Yeah.
So we have a whole bunch of questions. One of which, a good lead-off one. What happened to his first wife?
He and Marteel, they divorced in like the mid 40s, I think 45. And she continued to live in Louisiana. And I mean, she just went on. I think she passed away from cancer not long before him, or maybe a little after him, I believe. But I mean, she just was living in
Yeah,
life.
there are a lot of interesting stories about Winston. Oh, the Combine is on the Loudville and Beaver River. In the small world category, Winston appeared in the movie October Sky. I was working with the director of that movie as a location scout, and he was looking for locations. And he said he's trying to look for scenes that look like they're out of a Winston Link book. So if you can find a railroad that looks like has scenes that look like Winston Link shot pictures, that's what he's going for. I told him Winston Link would be really thrilled to hear that. And he says, "You mean he's alive?" I said, "Sure. We talk to him regularly." So can he talk to him? So I connected the two, and the next thing you know, 2 months later, Winston's going down there to be on set, and they gave him that part in the movie.
Which is awesome.
Well, the fellow was such a fan of Winston, and Winston just had a ball with it. And Winston's sense of humor, you mentioned a couple things that really sum it up. That business about if you need something to fall asleep to, or you want to drive your neighbors out of their house, listen to this record. That's his sense of humor. I remember once he was telling me that somebody parked their car in front of his driveway and he couldn't get the Model A out to drive it around. So he went into his house. He was so mad. He got a thing of Elmer's glue and a newspaper, and he glued newspaper to the windshield of that car. But what got him laughing so hard was that he said he turned the newspaper sideways so that the guy would have to turn his head to read it. So.
Oh man, that sounds better.
Yeah, Conchita's stunts were pretty strange. One of the things she did do was take the wheels off that Model A so he couldn't drive anywhere. She took the railings off the stairway going down to the lake and hoping that he would fall. She was trying to hasten his demise. It was the Man Gallery, the owner of the Man Gallery tried reaching him, and when he couldn't reach him any longer, he actually drove to the house and he discovered, yeah. And during that whole process, believe it or not, I actually testified at his divorce because it was part of that whole thing. It was one of the, Winston told me, "You can do business with her as if you're doing business with me. She's handling his business affairs so he can focus on making photographs." And then we were all wrapped up in it, but a few things didn't make sense. And he had a whole team of lawyers, and I'm drawing a blank on one of the names. One of them is a real hero. Long after Winston died, he pursued Winston and Ed Hayes, private eyes out of his own pocket, and they finally caught them going to a storage unit outside of York, Pennsylvania. And you now have those prints, and I think you have a special stamp that you put on those prints to show provenance, that they were printed by him and hidden away. That these are not. Because toward the end, he was allowing Conchita to make prints. He would oversee all of this, but I don't believe any of those are being sold. And those were some of the ones, But anyway, he commissioned a painting of the steam engine and the Combine up in the woods. And one time when I was at his house, I asked him if I could take a picture of it just so I could remember the painting. He allowed me, and I don't know what became of that painting after he died. It was a smallish watercolor. I don't know if you have it, but next time I come across those slides, I'll make sure you have it because it's really a nice painting, and it sums up his equipment collection. He was proud of that engine. I helped him work on it a couple of weekends. It was up in Newfoundland Engine House, and it was such a big project. And he was older at the time, but I have pictures of it moving because when it moved up to Rome Locomotive Works, it was a big deal. The railroad really took good care of them, and we followed the thing all the way up there. And it was on set for the movie, Trains That Passed in the Night.
Yeah.
That was, and I think it was the same producer turned it into The Scandal. And the last couple of conversations I had with Conway Link, he saw the movie and was very upset. They did not portray him in a true light at all. I never saw it because it was $400 to buy the video.
Oh gosh.
It was only shown at film festivals, and to go to the New York Film Festival was like another $500 thing. It's it's a week-long festival and all these little theaters, so I couldn't afford it at the time. This was the 1990s, and And again, trains that passed it, and I'd seen it. In fact, I have pictures on the set, and that was a fun event. So, trying to think some of the other stuff that went over one to mention, but that was, again, he was a character. When the car was at Whippany once, he called asking if I could go check it out. He got a call from the railroad that some vandals broke into the car. Would I go take a look at it? And so I went down and looked at it. They busted in one of the lower door panels. So I crawled inside through that, and they did spill some paint around, but the car was gorgeous. It was beautiful inside, paneled everything. It was like a mansion, tufted furniture. It was beautiful, So I, cleaned up what I could, and I secured the car. I put a door panel in and bolted it up, and so that at least the animals would stay out of it. And that's when it was at Whippany. And I think he willed it to the museum up there. And the locomotive went to a hobby shop owner in Utica, New York first.
Oh,
And I think it's been sold after that, which is where it's down there. So.
There's a whole string of compliments and accolades here in the comments. I'll let you read those yourself. But do you have a minute for a few more questions? There were a couple of things that actually are kind of interesting.
Yeah.
One quick question. Are you aware of any books with photos of the New York City bridges that Link did at the end of his career?
I'm not. I know, we're obviously in Roanoke in the old passenger station, for Norfolk and Western. And so that's our main focus is the N&W project. We did do an exhibit on some of his landscape work and different stuff that didn't have to do around trains, but I don't know of any books, about that. He seemed like he wanted to really focus on N&W, and that's all he worked on for the books.
I had seen those pictures. They're stunning.
Mhm.
Not aware any of them were published, but they're in his negative collection. So they're in there.
Yeah.
Somewhere. And then another gentleman asks, Frank Higby asks, have you ever met John C. Abbott, who wrote an interesting book about Link?
I have. I've talked to him sort of briefly. He did do the book Following in the Owl's Footsteps. And I would hate to see how long it took him to write that book, because it's like all these color photos, and he goes to so many of this exact same spots that Link took a lot of his images. And he has the coordinates and everything for where they are. It's intense. He did a lot of work on that book. And so, we do obviously get a lot of Link fans, and they want to go sometimes to these spots. And I always point them towards that book and caution them that Norfolk Southern might arrest you if you go to some of them. So watch out. But yeah.
And this is kind of an interesting question to sort of maybe tie it all together and wrap it up. If you were trying to explain the significance of Link to an outsider, and by outsider, I assume that means non-choo-choo lunatic, what one photo would you choose?
I don't know. Oh gosh, there's so many.
You're on the spot now.
Yeah. Again, like I said, the Popes on the Porch is I really love that one. I think that's my favorite. Maybe Hot Shot Eastbound, which a lot of people refer to as the drive-in, because that's his most famous, his most well-known. We get a lot of requests for publications to use Link photos, and it's every time it is the Hot Shot Eastbound. Vogue Japan has used that photo. Germany, several books and magazines out of Germany have used that. Any publication that wants to use a Link image, it's almost always the drive-in. So I'd probably do that just because it's his most iconic, I think, one that people, if you know Link, you automatically know, see that and know it's his. So
many rail photographers try to get the people out of the photo, and yet the Popes and the Hot Shot Eastbound are two probably of the most recognizable, sort of in the community and in general photos, and they both have people sort of prominently placed.
Yeah. Yeah. And he always, I mean, he was all about the stage. So he would set up the people exactly, you know, where he wanted them and all that. So,
But Link loved people. That's why he liked the Abingdon branch. He loved the people along the branch. And that's why he even got married at Green Cove. But he tried to make sure there was a person in every picture he could.
yeah.
Very cool stuff. I think that's probably all we have in the way of questions. Like I said, there's lots and lots of compliments, and actually a few people who apparently have visited your museum and were suitably impressed. So
Oh, wonderful.
sounds like you're doing a good job.
Oh, I hope so.
We'll have
we
to
like
send a
to hear it.
tri-state contingent down.
Yeah.
Full inspection. Very cool. Well, thank you very, very much.
Yeah. Thank you guys. It was great.
Yeah, Ali,
Yeah,
thank you
so
very,
much,
very
Lynsey.
much. And we'll be in touch. I have stuff from that era that would like to get to your museum. I've been meaning to call, and Tom Garber has asked me a couple of times to come down and
Yeah.
visit with you guys. So I need to do it because, again, Winston and I, we did a lot of stuff together, and I was at his funeral. In fact, visited the grave. I've got a real nice picture of the grave that means a lot, you know. But so do you know, is Conchita still here? Is she?
I don't know, to be honest. I have not really sought her out.
Meyer was that attorney's name, and I haven't talked to him in more than 10 years. You know,
Yeah,
'cause
and-
we stayed in touch with him for a while too.
We actually had the New York, the prosecutor
Right.
for her robbery, one of her robbery cases. He visited the museum, you know, and he was well retired at that point, but he, you know, was like, she was a nut job. Like he was
Right.
telling me all these stories.
And one of his legal team was as bad as the people they were prosecuting. I won't mention his name because I don't know if he's still alive either, but when the whole thing started coming to an end, the bills started piling up and the charges were outrageous, and, you know, it was
Mr. Delbeck, are you still here?
You know.
Yeah.
But we thank you very much. This was very good, very informative, and it's nice to see the museum getting a presence out in the community like this. And
Absolutely.
again, this is sort of hometown for him. He lived less than an hour from here.
Oh, good. Yeah.
He was up in Mount Kisco, so it wasn't a bad drive, and you know.
Well, great.
Very good.
Well, thank you guys.
I think this may actually be at its peak our most highly attended Zoom meeting so far. We've between the Zoom and Facebook Live, at one point we had over 130 people. So
Oh,
that's,
geez.
that's
Woo.
pretty cool. You can report back to your command staff there that you had a big audience. There's actually people checked in from as far away as Sacramento
Oh,
and
wow.
Tulum, New Mexico. It looks like those are the
Oh,
farthest
wonderful.
people here. So you got some West Coast folks and
Oh, very good.
a lot of good audience.
Link
Thank you
fans
very much.
everywhere. Great.
And I don't.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank everybody who attended tonight, and you know, we look forward to next month.
See you all in April.
All right. Good night. Thank you, Lynsey.
Thank you guys.
So long.